Democracy is a science. When dictatorships evolve into democratic societies, they eventually must enact transitional justice reform to rectify faults of the past. However, an even more important process democratic societies go through is disenchantment. In social science, disenchantment is a form of cultural rationalization. It is the process of removing artificially imbued extravagance from cultural and historical figures and events. For example, the influence and magnificence associated with tyrannical figures like Hitler or Mao Zedong have been adjusted in the modern age to reflect their more brutal legacies. Disenchantment is an opportunity for societies to reflect on and identify the realities of their own history. It is one of the key steps toward nurturing a democracy. Disenchantment frees cultures from falsely implanted oppressive values. The existence of the current thesis controversy proves that transitional justice has failed in Taiwan. Taiwan is a democracy only on the surface. However, right now, at this very moment, it is regressing into a dictatorship. Dictators always keep tight grasps on judicial systems, media outlets, and surveillance constructs to elevate their position in society. Dictators utilize the establishment to remove opposition by way of secret police and a character assassination. Taiwan's newest dictator manipulates public sentiment by mobilizing large-scale internet propaganda campaigns. They create false narratives and distort public perception of reality while discrediting their critics. This new dictator has seized control of the legal system and uses it to stall the judicial process. By controlling investigatory entities and media outlets, they command channels of communication and create an atmosphere of fear. Anyone who dares to stand in this dictator's way immediately becomes a target for character assassination. In our last episode, we discussed how Tsai Ing-wen plans on dealing with this thesis controversy. She has not only produced a thesis, but also utilized her status as the first female president of Taiwan to get the document into the Women's Library at LSE as of June 28, 2019. Now that her thesis has been successfully placed in an LSE library, it is that much easier for her to sell it as an authentic dissertation from 1984. On July 19, 2019, documents relevant to Tsai's education and career were deemed classified and will be kept top secret until December 31, 2049. On the same day, the Ministry of Education held a press conference saying that the black leather-bound book Tsai submitted to LSE in 2019 was a legitimate thesis from 1984. That was merely the first step in a series of actions to sell the thesis as legitimate. The second step came on September 23, 2019, when the presidential office reinforced the lies the Education Ministry told. On September 27, 2019, Tsai gave her consent as the thesis's author and entered the book into the National Central Library's collection. The National Central Library cooperated and placed Tsai's supposed thesis into their collection and dissertation database. Former legislator Apollo Chen pointed out that this marked the first time in the National Central Library's history that it did not receive a thesis from a school, but derived one from a personal copy instead. What are the implications here? There are 910 dissertations in the National Central Library. However, they aren't true theses, they're actually books. That's because the library can't verify absolutely whether or not these 910 theses are legitimate. Let's take a closer look. The library has received 49 theses that were written abroad. Of those 49, 48 were sent over by universities. The 49th thesis? Well, that's a personal copy the library accepted from a citizen. The library says that this personal copy is worthy of keeping in their dissertation collection. This is the one and only instance of the library accepting a personal thesis in the past decade. who sent it? President Tsai Ing-wen. Considering the thesis is Tsai's personal copy, how would the National Central Library go about getting authorization from LSE? Furthermore, the letter of authorization necessary to catalog the thesis did not utilize the standard format provided by the library. Instead, it was a personal document Tsai provided. Legal experts agree that this was an intentional move to minimize her liability. On November 28, 2018, the National Central Library followed in the Education Ministry's footsteps and also said the thesis was legitimate. Many of you are wondering about how this thesis was authorized. Once we received an authorization letter, the library set out to verify relevant information with the school that issued the degree or a library in the same country as that school. We cross-referenced our information with their catalogs. So, when we received the electronic copy of President Tsai's thesis, we accessed the British Library's dissertation database and checked to see if there was a relevant entry. We indeed found an entry for this thesis. Everything seemed to be in order, so we accepted the dissertation into our collection. I'm sorry, Mr. Deputy Director. With regards to accepting the thesis into the National Central Library's collection, we just established that the author has to give their consent. However, there must also be verification from an administrator at the school where the thesis originates from. This is something that the school must provide to prove that the thesis's author was indeed a student at that university. Take, for example, these two schools in Hong Kong. They can directly authenticate theses and verify that the authors were students at their school. However, you're telling me that you just looked at a few library catalogs, called it a day, and didn't even bother reaching out to school officials? Can you explain that to me? The library has never asked for official authentication documents when taking in theses. Schools will sometimes send them over, but they're not absolutely necessary. These conditions are set forth by the National Central Library. The authorization process is very clear. When authorizing a thesis for entry into the National Central Library, there are two things that are required. One is getting the thesis's author to sign an authorization letter. They must also provide digital text and take legal liability for the authenticity of their work. People submitting theses written at schools abroad must also provide their degree as further proof of their credentials. President Tsai provided two documents as proof of her thesis's authenticity. One is a memo notifying her she passed her viva, while the other was a letter that said she submitted her thesis. Dr. Pang already presented 3 diplomas from 3 different years, all bearing different signatures. Which one did you use to verify the thesis when accepting it into the library? We didn't see those, we just had the 2 documents we were given. So you were given 2 documents, neither were a degree? No. Tell me again, which 2 documents did you receive? The memo notifying Tsai that she passed her viva and the one that notified her that she will receive her degree. No signatures on either of those documents. No signatures. We had authorization, not to mention that the PDF file came. All right, I won't give you a hard time. All right, as long as you're answering me truthfully, then I won't give you a hard time. There is plenty of evidence to support that the National Central Library processed Tsai's thesis in an unlawful manner. Many experts have called on the library to remove this phony thesis. However, the establishment continues to play by Tsai's rules. They are complicit in lying to 23 million Taiwanese people. On October 18, 2019, Tsai Ing-wen used her power and influence as president of Taiwan to successfully enter a digital copy of her thesis into the LSE library and the British Library's online databases. However, entries in both library databases are marked as a personal copy. These actions make it harder for journalists to keep track of this controversy. Tsai and her entourage have successfully distorted public understanding of her thesis. However, Tsai's team struggles to bend the reality that the University of London's Senate House and Institute for Advanced Legal Studies' libraries never held a copy of her doctoral thesis. Even today, Tsai Ing-wen and her entourage have been making marginal victories in concealing the truth. They successfully obtained a replacement diploma from LSE in 2015 with the help of former LSE director Lord Anthony Giddens. They've also produced a questionable thesis. However, despite succeeding in creating the illusion of a legitimate thesis, Tsai has left herself vulnerable to exposure. Her greatest victory may have produced the blind spot that leads to her downfall. Evidence that served to validate this dissertation have existed for 35 years. Firstly, everyone knows that in years past, you could look up President Tsai's dissertation on the British Library's thesis database. That's the first piece of evidence. The second piece is here. Professor Huan Lin went to LSE and flipped through the president's thesis himself. He then published a report about it online. In his report, Lin says that on June 19, 2019, the school told him that according to their records, Tsai's thesis was moved from the University of London's Senate House Library to the university's Institute of Advanced Legal Studies' library at some point in time. In earlier episodes, we've already established that these 2 points from the presidential office are invalid. The entry in the British Library's database was created in June 2015 and not 35 years ago like the presidential office claims. 2015 was also the year that Tsai obtained a replacement diploma with the help of Lord Anthony Giddens. The information invalidating this claim came in an email from LSE's compliance manager. With regards to the second point, claiming that there was a thesis at the Senate House Library, our viewers already know that this refers to an incident in 2011 where someone attempted to smuggle an unknown dissertation into the library's collection. The presidential office never mentioned this in their statements. However, Tsai and her entourage have already performed the extravagant act of reviving a thesis from 36 years ago. But their actions are tantamount to admitting that Tsai's thesis was not published 36 years ago like it should have been. Had the thesis been properly published, then detailed records should exist. There would be no need for an extravagant show of smoke and mirrors to get a thesis into the women's library at LSE. There's one very important question on our mind. Is it possible for a thesis to disappear for 36 years? To find the answer, we turn to LSE's regulation for research degrees. This policy dictates how a thesis should be submitted and entered into a school library's collection. Firstly, a submitted thesis must be authenticated by a school library. Additionally, the author must agree to make their work public. Article 41.3 of the regulations state that graduating students must authorize that if a degree is awarded, an electronic copy of their thesis will be deposited in LSE Theses Online, the school's academic database. Of course, Tsai can say that there were no electronic databases 35 years ago, but why would it take her until 2015 to get her thesis in one? In fact, let's take a look at Article 58 of the regulation, which says, after the examiners have confirmed their decision, the PhD Academy will notify the candidate of the result. The degree will not be awarded until the candidate has provided a copy of the successful thesis in accordance with Regulation 41.3. In all other circumstances, a thesis will be placed in the public domain immediately after the award of the degree. Alternatively, a candidate may apply to the chair for an embargo period of up to 1 year. Such a request can be made on the grounds, for example, of a publication contract. The regulations set forth by LSE here prove that it would be impossible for a thesis from the school to disappear for 36 years. The black leather-bound book produced by Tsai's team proves that her thesis was never made public. It brings Tsai's doctorate as a whole into question. Back then, computers did not exist, and people had to rely on typewriters for word processing. It's true pages need to be calibrated manually to each typewriter in order to maintain a consistent format. If you don't do so, then the page will not align properly. That said, if this thesis was done in word processing software, then everything would be neat and aligned, right? When Tsai Ing-wen decided to enter her thesis into the National Central Library, a few diligent overseas investigators submitted it for forensic analysis. After half a year of careful examination, many findings with legal ramifications were brought to light. Traces and remnants left behind by typewriters indicated that 4 different machines across 3 decades were involved in the text's composition. However, the presidential office maintains that Tsai worked on the thesis between January and June of 1983. She completed the thesis in a mere 5 months. The interesting thing is, one of the typewriters used to complete the thesis wasn't produced until the latter half of 1983. How is it possible that a thesis submitted in June 1983 was written using a typewriter not available then? What does the presidential office have to say about that? The evaluation committee for the president's dissertation approved her topic in January of 1983. By June of 1983, she turned in her dissertation. The president then completed her doctoral defense in October of that year as well. The University of London notified the president that she successfully passed her viva in January of 1984. Just as public doubt reached a boiling point for Tsai and her accomplices, another difficult question popped up. Who was Tsai's doctoral advisor? The members of LSE's faculty that would have expertise relevant to Tsai's topic are limited. Tsai's entourage had to come up with a person whose existence and role could not be definitively proven. That person was Michael J. Elliot. We already established that Elliot only possessed a bachelor's degree. The idea that he could possibly advise a PhD candidate is unlikely at best. Elliot specialized in constitutional and administrative law, meaning he had absolutely no experience with trade law, which is what Tsai supposedly studied. Tsai's prior work borrowed heavily from the texts of Professor John J. Barcello and Dr. Brian Hindley. However, she never once used any of Elliot's work in her own. That may not come as a surprise considering Elliot has not published any academic work himself. With what we know about Elliot now, there's no way that he could have been Tsai's doctoral advisor. He was not qualified enough to oversee the formulation of unfair trade practices and safeguard actions. The presidential office seems to know the implications and gravity of Elliot's lack of credentials. They have begun attempting to address this unlikelihood. Several netizens have come forward to question Michael Elliott's role as a doctoral advisor. Why is it that someone with only a bachelor's could advise a PhD candidate? I will explain. Michael Elliot is an influential expert in international trade. If you search for him on Google, you can find a lot of his information.
并且有相当权威的人士。现在不只有 Word， 还有 Google， 你只要 Google 就可以查到很多的资料。他在美国、英国许多知名的大学都有相关的。
He has instructed at several top-tier universities in the United States and the United Kingdom. Elliot's title at LSE was Lecturer of Law. In America, that would make him the equivalent of an associate professor. In the United Kingdom, a lecturer could act as a doctoral advisor, otherwise known as a supervisor. Michael Elliot is listed on President Tsai's student record as her supervisor, confirming his position at the school.
Supervisor 的栏位也载明了 Michael Elliot 就是蔡总统的指导教授，这就是校方的证明。下一页，这是世界经济论坛 WEF 网站上面对 Michael Elliot 的介绍。
Next, let's take a look at the World Economic Forum's website. You can find Michael Elliot's information there as well. Elliot has also worked at Northwestern University in the US and the University of Warwick in the UK. We already know of his time at LSE, but he also spent time in the UK Cabinet Office. He had been invited to speak several times at the World Economic Forum. A few days ago, the media revealed that Bill Gates made a commemorative tweet when Elliot passed away.
Michael Elliot 先生过世时候 ，Bill Gates 还曾经用 Twitter 发文来悼念。
There was only one problem here. The bulk of Mr. Elliot's impressive achievements took place after he left LSE. The presidential office missed this blind spot once again, unraveling their lies surrounding Mr. Elliot. Our investigation further revealed that Mr. Elliot only held a supporting role at LSE's PhD Academy. His job was to provide students assistance with their daily lives and studies. There is hardly any record of him acting as a certified thesis supervisor during his time at LSE. Furthermore, according to LSE records, Mr. Elliot did not act as a supervisor for any other student. He is the perfect person for Tsai to name as her advisor. Another important piece of information is that Elliot was working on Margaret Thatcher's campaign in 1983. His team dissolved in June 1983 once Thatcher was successfully re-elected as Prime Minister. Tsai said she was writing 3 to 5 pages of her thesis a day during this time period. How is it possible that Elliot, who had left LSE to work on an election campaign, could advise a PhD candidate on her thesis? Dr. Huan Lin and Dr. Xu Yongtai discovered that the black leather-bound thesis at the Women's Library at LSE was missing 6 pages. 1 missing page is already too many for a published thesis, but 6? There are rules in place that forbid photographing Tsai's thesis at the Women's Library without consent from the author. It is that rule that obstructs any attempt to delve into this anomaly any further. However, the presidential office themselves admitted to the missing pages during a press conference on September 23, 2019. Everyone can see the effects of time on this thesis. The copy in the Women's Library at LSE is indeed missing 6 pages. That's because some pages were accidentally left out during the transfer process. However, those pages can indeed be found in other versions of the thesis that we found at other establishments.
所以现在我手上也提供给各位，也就是论文里面Part 1的第1章，就总共有从1到11页。那因为知道大家可能要花一点时间阅读，我们也做了简单的中文摘译。
The presidential office may not take a matter of 6 missing pages seriously, but it's unthinkable that a proper thesis would be missing any pages at all. Former director of the Graduate Institute of Journalism at National Taiwan University, Professor Dennis Peng, found that all LSE theses are printed with 9 security threads. People can verify that a thesis is complete just by looking at them. It's obvious here that when the Women's Library at LSE processed Tsai's submitted thesis, they did so improperly. The 6 missing pages here prove that this thesis originated from Tsai's private collection, and it cannot be categorized as a proper academic thesis. This is another devastating mistake that Tsai's entourage has overlooked. On September 4, 2019, the presidential office published a photo of a memo that was used to notify Tsai that she had passed her oral defense. This memo did not have a signature from any school official. However, the presidential office labeled various parts of the memo themselves, but that didn't stop the questions from pouring in.
这个论文当年是35年前的论文所以当时的做法有它的做法嘛那如果你以现在的眼光去看过去的，那当然就说你或许有一些要问的问题，但是基本上我们都处理论文都按照当时的规定在处理的了
When addressing public concern, Tsai constantly takes shelter behind the reasoning that rules were different 35 years ago. However, Dr. Huan Lin recently made an important discovery. He managed to unearth a similar memo from 1984 addressed to another student. On the surface, Tsai's memo doesn't differ too much from the one Dr. Lin found, except for one crucial detail. Tsai's memo does not have a signature. The other memo bears the signature of Mrs. G.F. Roberts, a school official. Tsai's memo is also missing a notary signature. The presence of these 2 signatures means that under normal circumstances, a memo like this would not only have been given to the candidate in question, but copies would also be left with school administrators and the notary who verified the document. This measure is meant to deter forgery. What's the takeaway here? The memo that Tsai showed the public was tampered with. We now know that Tsai has tight control over information online. She has used her influence and power to seal away documents pertaining to her education and career. Interestingly, it seems that she still has reservations about forging someone's signature. These hesitations may be what ultimately costs her. Along with the replacement diploma Tsai received in 2015 came a document that certified the degree's authenticity. We can almost be certain that the document is not genuine. The diploma that we see is certainly convincing, but the process by which it came to be is anything but. That is why Tsai must keep insisting that the existence of a degree proves the existence of a thesis. On May 20th, 2020, Tsai Ing-wen was inaugurated for a second term in office. She can continue to use her seat of power to hide the truth for the next 4 years. We can only imagine what those next few years will be like. She may expand her powers and might even seek to grant herself immunity. This thesis controversy is a matter of transitional justice. If we can't stop misconduct while it's happening, how could we ever hope to fix the mistakes of the past? The truth behind Tsai's credentials is beginning to come to light, but it will ultimately come down on the people to pass judgment. Next time, we will unveil the results of the forensic analysis done on Tsai's thesis.